Welcome all to our Safety for Directors and Senior Executives training. My name is Stephanie Powell and I'm one of the Health and Safety Consultants at Thomas Carroll Management Services. The training will comprise of you completing this recorded training, followed by an interactive workshop where we'll be able to discuss any queries that you have and also highlight and recap on the training itself and looking at how, as directors and those leading your organisation, how you can ensure that you are leading health and safety correctly to make a successful business. So, some of the objectives that we'd look for you to achieve by the end of this training: you should be aware of the consequences of failing to manage health and safety. You should have a firm understanding of the roles and responsibilities that you have as directors and senior personnel in terms of the management of health and safety within your organisations. You should understand the requirements of what an effective health and safety management programme looks like and how you can integrate that into your business and into other business systems that you may have within your organisation. The session will be split into 4 parts, allowing you to take stock and absorb the information, and following the completion of all 4 parts, we'll be able to discuss the relevant highlights and some pertinent points as part of the interactive workshop. So let's get started. In part 1, we'll be looking at the importance of managing risk. Let's paint the picture of health and safety. So, the importance of managing risk within any business is vital, and health and safety should not be seen as a cost and should be seen as an investment. It shouldn't be in competition with any other delivery standards. In fact, good health and safety is linked to good business. When we look about the importance of managing risk, there are 3 considerations that we need to take into account. We need to take into account moral considerations, legal duties, and economic considerations. So what does that mean? Well, let's start with moral considerations. If you ask someone why it's important for us to have health and safety, ultimately we do have a moral obligation. Ultimately, you want to keep people safe and you want them to go home at the end of the day in one piece. Without the people within your business, your employees, you don't have a business. So you need to look after them and make sure that they are not being put at risk through the work activities that you do. Then you have legal duties. So you ask someone, why do we do health and safety? Well, because it's the law. And we'll discuss the law in a bit more detail as we go through this training. But the law definitely provides a framework for us and highlights the need for us to manage risk. And then we have economic considerations. If we fail to manage health and safety, and our risks aren't being managed, then ultimately we can put someone at risk in terms of them being injured or having their health affected adversely. Accidents cost money, they cost time, and they put lots of pressure on a business. So if we don't manage health and safety effectively, it can create the risk of accidents, which cost money. Plus also, if we fail to comply with our legal duties, then that can also cost us money. And as we go through this training, we'll go into a little bit more detail about how bad health and safety or poorly managed health and safety can have a detrimental impact on your business, not only from a legal perspective, but also from a financial one. But let's put the legal and the economic stuff aside for a second, because yes, of course, we want to be legally compliant. And yes, of course, we want to be as economically and financially viable as possible. But ultimately, some of the most effective businesses out there are ones that put health and safety first in terms of the people that they have. So when we're writing a risk assessment, or we're getting staff to complete a checklist, or we're sending staff on training, let's not think we're doing that to cover ourselves legally, or we're not just doing it to make sure that we don't have accidents. What we're actually doing is we're making sure that we are protecting people, and we're putting their health and safety first. So the purpose of filling out that checklist, it isn't just a paper exercise to show that we comply with the law. Actually, it has a purpose. We are checking something to make sure it's working, it's in a safe condition, and to highlight any issues that we might need to follow up. So whenever we look at any parts of our health and safety management system, let's try and put a bit of human element to it. Let's try and create a human focus to it. And if we can do that, the legal and the economic stuff will fall into line automatically. But if anything, when it comes to the importance of managing risk, we are doing it to protect people and to make sure that they do not become injured or have their health affected whilst at work. And there's a bit of background to this. Okay, accidents happen. These are UK statistics taken from the Health and Safety Executive latest statistics from 2018-2019. Now, as a fact that accidents happen, one thing I will say is no employee goes to work thinking, do you know what, I'm not going to come home today. Do you know what, I'm going to come home, but I'm going to have a serious injury at work. No one really goes to work with that in their mindset. They go to work to earn money so that they enjoy their lives, like most of us. So then how do these accidents happen? And there's lots of facets that are involved when it comes to accidents, but ultimately accidents happen. So the importance of managing risk is ultimately so we're not putting any of our employees or anyone else who could come into contact with our work at risk. Okay, I'm just going to go through these statistics briefly, just to give you an overview. So in 2018-2019, there were 147 fatalities at work. This doesn't include road traffic incidents. These are injuries, fatal injuries that happened within the workplace. Then we have just over 18,000 major or specified injuries reported by an employer. Major or specified injuries are typically ones that are broken bones, serious burns, amputations, quite your serious injuries. And they're ones reported by employers. Just in terms of general injuries, there were 69,208 injuries to workers reported in 1 year by employers. When we look at some of the injuries that have led to someone being off for more than 7 days, there's 138,000 of those. And then there were 443,000 injuries that led up to a 7-day absence. So there was an absence from work, there was time off from work, but not beyond the 7 days. So lots of injuries happening at work. And I'm sure that I'll get to know a little bit more about your business when we come to the interactive part of this training. And you may be thinking, okay, well, our risk doesn't put us in the fatal category. Okay, great. But we still need to consider any major or over 7-day injuries that can happen. It's important that we consider any risks that could create injury within our business. And even though you may not have activities that pose a risk of fatalities, perhaps you employ contractors who undertake such high risk work. And when we come to the interactive session, we'll go into a little bit more detail as to why contractors can sometimes be a weak link when it comes to your health and safety. But you're still jointly responsible for them. More of that later on. So just some food for thought. Accidents happen. Okay, and they don't just happen by magic. Okay, they happen through some form of failure. And it's estimated that around 80% of all accidents happen through some form of failure in management. And that isn't a failure by a manager. That means the ability to manage health and safety within a business. So just having a look at some of the statistics in a little bit more detail. Okay, we talked about injuries that resulted in people being off for more than 7 days and up to 7 days. Let's look at the types of accident types that have caused those injuries. So the most common type of non-fatal injury to employees is through slips, trips and falls on the same level. Then we've got handling, lifting or carrying. So that's your manual handling stuff. We've got 10% of non-fatal injuries caused by some form of being struck by a moving object, 8% acts of violence, and 8% falls from height. I wonder if your accident statistics follow any of these trends, or do you have more of a common type of accidents? Is slip, trips and falls a common type of accident within your business? Perhaps. Let's look at fatalities then. When we look at fatalities, the types of accidents change a little bit now. So compared to non-fatal injuries, where only 8% of accidents were falls from height, when it comes to fatalities, falls from height is the biggest cause of fatalities in the workplace. Staggering 40% of deaths within a workplace happen where someone has fallen from height, and not necessarily from a great height either. 56% of all serious injuries happen at a height of less than 2 meters. So that's an interesting fact just to relay there. And then we've got fatal accidents caused by being struck by a moving vehicle, a moving object, contact with moving machinery, or being trapped by something collapsing or overturning. Again, are there any of those risk factors within your business? Do you have work from height? Do you have moving vehicles, moving objects, moving machinery? Or perhaps any plant or equipment that could collapse or overturn? Could that be a risk for you? So let's just look at fatality rates and where we've come from. So the Health and Safety at Work Act was introduced in 1974. And it wasn't until early 80s, going into the 90s, where we started to see a bit of a downward trend when it came to fatalities. And when the Health and Safety at Work Act was introduced back in 1974, the fatality rate was up in its thousands. So for us to come to 147, we have come a long, long way. However, you'll notice that from about 2012, 2013, that fatality rate has plateaued. So we aren't, as organisations, being as improving compared to previous years. Interesting. But let's not forget, as a country, we are pretty hot when it comes to health and safety. So when it comes to fatal injuries, compared to some of our EU counterparts, whilst we're still currently in the EU, you'll notice that the UK has the lowest fatality rate compared to some of the other countries. So even though we are governed by EU directives at the moment, in fact, the health and safety law within the UK is actually quite stringent, and it shows by the fatality rates that we have. One thing that we haven't mentioned so far is we've talked about injuries and we've talked about fatalities, but we haven't talked about ill health, because people can be off work because of ill health caused by work. So it's important to look at this as a statistic as well. When we look at the statistic on the left, it shows a breakdown of any new or long-standing work-related ill health by type. And the two most common types of ill health in relation to work is stress and depression or anxiety. So stress, depression and anxiety is the biggest cause of ill health at work, closely followed by musculoskeletal disorders. That's commonly associated with your manual handling and posture activities. And then we have 19% of other types of illnesses caused by work. How that then transcends from the amount of ill health and the types of ill health that we have, we go to the figure on the right, and we look at how many working days are lost by these two main types of ill health. And you notice that 54% of working days are lost due to stress, depression, or anxiety, and 29% of working days are lost due to musculoskeletal disorders. And these are just averages. So you take stress, depression, or anxiety, the average period of absence is 29 days, average. So obviously you could have situations where that's more and situations where it could be less. So if you had someone who was suffering from work-related stress, depression, anxiety, The average amount of time they could be off is 29 days. Could you afford to lose one person and have them go off with that? Same goes for musculoskeletal disorders. These types of injuries and ill health don't necessarily go away overnight, and hence why they have more of an impact on health and have greater working days lost. When we looked at the statistic previously, there was an other ill health conditions, and these are just some of the other ill health conditions that are accounted for and things that we should be considering as part of our business. So some of the common health conditions which can be caused or made worse by work. We've talked about work-related stress, we've talked about musculoskeletal disorders, but what about things like skin disease? What about work-related asthma, noise-induced hearing loss, hand-arm vibration syndrome, other respiratory disorders such as COPD? What about cancers? Asbestos is on there. Some people may think, well, asbestos has been banned since the early 90s. How can that still be a reportable ill health condition? Of course, there's still asbestos-containing materials within properties throughout the UK. So if someone is doing maintenance or we have contractors going in to undertake work, then that's where possibly we get the asbestos-related risks still with us now in 2020 and still beyond. So, to finish us up, to get us thinking about injury and ill health and thinking inwardly in our organisation, I want you to write down these 3 questions and I want you to have an answer. We're going to discuss these as part of the interactive workshop. And I want you to not just think, oh, well, we haven't had an accident, or we don't have injuries. I want you to think hard, think about the risks that you have. Do you have working at height? Do you have use of plant and machinery? Is slip, trips and falls possibly something that would be the most common in your environment if housekeeping isn't great or you have slippery floors? So think about your organisation and answer these 3 questions. Number 1, what are the main risks of injury? Either going on previous accident records or what you perceive could be the main risks of injury. Let's not be of the mindset of, well, it's never happened before. Okay, sometimes the lack of accidents can sometimes be due to luck and not necessarily through management. So what are the risks that you think could create injury to people within your organisation? And if you have accidents, what types of injuries are the most common? Do they relate to any of the trends that we've seen in the slide so far? And then finally, because we don't just look at injury, we need to be thinking about health, the stuff that can affect people long term. What things pose a risk to the health of your employees, do you think? We'll be going through your answers when we reach the interactive session. So I want you to pause this video and answer these 3 questions.